The sands of Iraq hide more than just dust and stone. This is the land of Mesopotamia, the true cradle of civilization, where humanity first built cities, invented writing, and created wonders that shaped our world. By the end of this journey, you will know 25 of its most astonishing forgotten marvels, places and artifacts you can still see today, from towering temples to tiny, haunting idols. We will walk through a blue glazed gate of gods and decode a flood story older than the Bible. What do you think is the most important legacy a civilization can leave behind? Rising from the flat plains like a man-made mountain, the ziggurat of Ur stands as a silent declaration of faith and power. This is the very first wonder on our list, and it sets the stage for everything that follows, a monument so colossal it redefined what human hands could build. Constructed around 2,100 years before the Common Era by King Ur-Nammu, this was not a tomb like the pyramids of Egypt, but a bridge. Its purpose was to connect the earthly realm with the divine, a towering staircase meant for the gods to descend and for priests to ascend closer to the heavens. It was dedicated to Nana, the wise and powerful moon god, whose silver light watched over the city of Ur. The structure you can see today, even partially restored, is a masterpiece of ancient engineering. Its core is made of sun-dried mud brick, but the entire exterior was originally clad in a skin of baked bricks, each one set in bitumen, a natural tar that acted as a powerful waterproof mortar. This created a formidable shell, a literal fortress against time and the elements. The design was a series of massive rectangular tiers, each one smaller than the last, stacked to create that iconic stepped profile. A triple staircase would have converged at a grand gateway on the first level, leading priests up to the sacred temple that once crowned the summit, a place no ordinary person was allowed to go. What we see now is largely the work of a reconstruction in the 20th century, which stabilized the massive base and rebuilt the lower stages and one of the 3 staircases. Yet even in this state, its presence is overwhelming. To stand before it is to feel the ambition of an entire civilization solidified into brick and earth. It tells us that for the people of Mesopotamia, reaching for the divine was not a metaphor, it was an architectural directive. This ziggurat was the center of the universe for the city of Ur, the axis around which all life, commerce, and cosmology revolved. Its sheer scale makes you wonder, what kind of society could organize the labor, the materials, and the vision to create such a thing over 4,000 years ago? The answer lies in the very bricks themselves, and in the next forgotten wonder, which offers a much more intimate and far more puzzling glimpse into the Mesopotamian mind. While the ziggurat reached for the heavens, another wonder proclaimed its glory at the very entrance to a city. If you travel to the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, you can walk through a fragment of one of the ancient world's most breathtaking sights, the Ishtar Gate. This was the main entrance to the inner city of Babylon, constructed under King Nebuchadnezzar II around 600 years before the Common Era. Its purpose was to awe and intimidate, a monumental declaration of Babylonian supremacy dedicated to Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. The gate's most stunning feature is its vibrant blue glaze, a color achieved through a complex process using cobalt which covered every surface. Against this brilliant backdrop marched a procession of sacred animals molded from glazed brick, fierce lions, symbols of Ishtar, paced along the processional way. Majestic bulls associated with the weather god Adad, and the mysterious Mushhushu dragons, hybrid creatures with serpentine necks and feline forelegs sacred to the chief god Marduk, adorned the gate itself. To stand before this reconstruction is to be enveloped in a sea of shimmering lapis lazuli and gold, a sensory overload of power and piety. Yet this raises a profound question. The gate you see in Berlin is a reconstruction built from original bricks excavated in the early 20th century. The true, immense location of the Ishtar Gate lies buried under the soil of modern Iraq, its full grandeur and context lost. We have this magnificent fragment, but the gate is severed from its city, a dazzling symbol displaced. It speaks to the immense reach of Babylonian culture, an empire that could conceive of coating an entire city gate in precious blue glaze and populating it with a menagerie of mythical beasts. This was not just architecture, it was a statement written in ceramic and color, telling all who entered that they were stepping into a realm of divine favor and unconquerable strength. The mystery of its original, complete form only deepens its legend. What other wonders, then, were meant to be seen not by approaching armies, but by the gods themselves looking down from above? But the true wealth of Ur lay not atop its ziggurat, but deep beneath the city's dust. In the 1920s, archaeologist Leonard Woolley made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the world of archaeology and rewrite our understanding of Sumerian society. He unearthed the royal tombs of Ur, a complex of burial chambers dating back to around 2,600 years before the Common Era. These were not simple graves, they were portals to the underworld, stocked with unimaginable treasures and shadowed by a profound, chilling mystery. The most staggering find was what Woolley termed the Great Death Pit. This was not a tomb for a single ruler, but a rectangular chamber containing the carefully arranged bodies of 74 individuals. They were not victims of violence, but of a deliberate ceremonial act. These people, mostly women adorned with exquisite jewelry of gold and lapis lazuli, along with soldiers and attendants, had taken part in a ritual. Evidence suggests they drank a sedative potion and lay down in orderly rows, accompanied by musical instruments like elegant lyres inlaid with shell and lapis, to accompany their royal master or mistress into the afterlife. This practice, known from texts as the Great Death, reveals a belief system where the afterlife mirrored the earthly one, and a king or queen required their entire court to serve them for eternity. It is a concept both magnificent and deeply unsettling, showcasing absolute power and profound faith intertwined. The artifacts recovered from these tombs are nothing short of breathtaking. Take the so-called ram in a thicket, a pair of figurines not actually depicting a ram, but a goat standing on its hind legs against a flowering tree. This masterpiece, crafted from gold, silver, lapis lazuli, shell, and red limestone, is a symphony of ancient artistry. Each delicate curl of the goat's fleece is individually formed from shell, its face and legs covered in gold leaf, and the tree blossoms carved from precious stone. Then there was Queen Puabi, whose tomb remained largely unlooted. Her body was found wearing an elaborate headdress made of ribbons of beaten gold, enormous golden earrings, and a cape of beads made from lapis lazuli and carnelian. A cylinder seal found on her body bore her name and title, confirming she was a queen in her own right, not merely a royal consort. These tombs force us to confront the stark realities of Sumerian civilization. The staggering wealth in gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian, materials traded from far-off Afghanistan and the Indus Valley, speaks of a sophisticated, far-reaching trade network. The sheer craftsmanship of the objects reveals a society with specialized, highly skilled artisans. But the ritual sacrifice in the Great Death Pit lays bare a rigid, extreme social hierarchy and a belief in an afterlife so literal it demanded the ultimate loyalty. The royal tombs of Ur are a paradox, a collection of stunning artistic beauty that opens a window onto a world of profound, and to us deeply foreign, beliefs. They make you wonder what other secrets might be sealed in clay, waiting to tell their stories not of gold but of everyday life. Yet for all the grandeur of tombs and temples, the true foundation of a civilization is not just its gold but its laws. In the Louvre Museum in Paris, standing over 7 feet tall, is a pillar of polished black stone that represents one of humanity's most consequential leaps forward. This is the Code of Hammurabi stele, created by order of the Babylonian king Hammurabi around 1754 years before the Common Era. Carved from a single block of gleaming diorite, it is not merely a monument, it is a functioning legal document, inscribed with 282 laws written in precise cuneiform script. This was one of the earliest and most complete written legal codes ever discovered, a blueprint for an entire society. We often associate it with the stark principle of lex talionis, the law of retaliation, famously summarized as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And that is there, establishing a concept of proportional justice. But the code's true genius and complexity lie in its breathtaking scope. It regulated everything. There were laws governing commercial transactions, setting fair prices for goods and services, and establishing standards for builders. If a house collapsed and killed the owner, the builder could be put to death. It detailed family law covering marriage, divorce, and inheritance rights, offering some protections for women in a patriarchal society, such as the return of her dowry if her husband divorced her without cause. It addressed agricultural disputes, medical malpractice, and the responsibilities of public officials. The code also meticulously outlined the different penalties for harming a noble, a commoner, or a slave, revealing a society rigidly structured by class. This stele was not hidden away. It was erected in a public place so that any literate person or anyone who could have it read to them could know the rules and their consequences. This was revolutionary, the idea that justice should not be arbitrary, but written, known, and applied to all, even if unequally. But Hammurabi understood that laws written by a king could be ignored or disputed. So at the very top of the stele is a powerful piece of political and religious imagery, a bas-relief that solves this problem. It shows King Hammurabi himself standing in a posture of reverence before the enthroned sun god Shamash, the god of justice. Shamash is handing Hammurabi a measuring rod and a ring, symbols of royal authority and the divine right to rule. This single image conveys a world-changing idea that these laws are not merely Hammurabi's decrees, they are a divine gift sanctioned by the gods themselves. It fused religious authority with legal authority, making obedience to the king's code a sacred duty. The stele is a masterwork of propaganda, law, and theology carved in stone. It tells us that Mesopotamia was building something even more durable than ziggurats, a framework for order, fairness, and societal control that would influence legal thought for millennia. It makes you wonder, if their laws were this sophisticated, what other systems of knowledge did they invent to make sense of their world? Laws written in stone could govern a city, but a king's power had to be seen to be believed. In the hushed halls of the British Museum, you can witness that power in motion, frozen in a moment of terrifying beauty on the gypsum wall panels known as the Lion Hunt of Ashurbanipal. Created around 650 years before the Common Era for the Assyrian king's palace at Nineveh, these are not static portraits, they are a cinematic narrative carved in stone. The scenes are brutally dynamic, showing Ashurbanipal in his chariot, bow drawn, as he faces a charge of lions released from cages for a royal hunt. This was no sport, it was a sacred ritual, a dramatic reenactment of the king's divine duty to protect his people from the forces of chaos, symbolized by the most fearsome predator known to the Mesopotamian world. The artistry here is staggering in its detail and emotional force. Assyrian sculptors mastered the depiction of anatomy in motion. You can see the straining muscles of the horses as they rear, the taut sinews in the king's arm as he releases an arrow, and most hauntingly, the agony of the lions themselves. One panel shows a lioness pierced by multiple arrows, dragging her paralyzed hind legs, her mouth open in a silent roar of defiance and suffering. The artists captured not just action but pathos, forcing the viewer to confront the cost of this royal spectacle. Every element served as propaganda. The king is always depicted as calm, composed, and dominant amidst the frenzy. his perfect curls and elegant robes untouched by dust or struggle. He is the unshakable center, the guarantor of order against the wild. These reliefs line the walls of his palace, broadcasting a clear message to visiting dignitaries and courtiers that their ruler possessed the strength, courage, and divine mandate to subdue any threat, whether beast or rebellious city. They were a permanent, inescapable advertisement for the Assyrian state's absolute power. But this vivid portrayal of controlled violence leads to a deeper curiosity. What did this powerful civilization believe awaited them when their own strength finally failed, when the chariot wheels stopped turning for the last time? The Assyrian reliefs show a world obsessed with power and control, but one legendary wonder from Babylon promised a paradise of life, not death. We arrive now at perhaps the most famous and elusive of all Mesopotamian marvels, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Ancient Greek historians wrote of a breathtaking terraced garden, a lush green mountain of vegetation built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his homesick wife, a wonder so grand it was listed among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Yet here lies a fascinating puzzle, because no definitive archaeological evidence of the gardens has ever been found in Babylon, and no contemporary Babylonian text mentions them. This has led scholars to debate for centuries: were they a magnificent reality, a poetic exaggeration, or a story transplanted from another place entirely? Instead of chasing a ghost, let us focus on the undeniable reality of the site itself, the city of Babylon, because its physical remains are a wonder in their own right. Walking through the ruins today, south of modern Baghdad, you tread on the dust of Nebuchadnezzar's colossal ambition. You can see the vast, sprawling foundation of his principal palace, a complex of courtyards and chambers that covered an area larger than many modern city blocks. Nearby, the outlines of the temple dedicated to Marduk, the city's patron god, hint at its former scale. The course of the Euphrates River now shifted, once flowed directly through the city's heart, and its banks would have been a hive of docks and activity. Most impressively, you can still trace the path of the city's immense inner and outer walls, described by historians as so wide that a 4-horse chariot could turn around on top of them. These are the bones of a metropolis designed to proclaim its supremacy. Within this context, the idea of the Hanging Gardens becomes less a fairy tale and more a plausible feat of engineering that fits the Babylonian character. If they existed, they would not have been hanging in the sense of suspended by ropes, but rather overhanging, a series of ascending terraces like a giant stepped pyramid made of soil and greenery, possibly built against or within the palace walls. The true miracle would have been the water system. To keep such a garden alive in the arid Mesopotamian climate would have required a hydraulic masterpiece, perhaps a chain of buckets lifted by a screw pump from the Euphrates to a reservoir at the top, allowing water to cascade down from terrace to terrace. This was a civilization that built the Ishtar Gate and codified laws in stone, so creating a monumental garden was well within their technical and artistic vision. Whether the gardens were a literal truth or a powerful legend born from descriptions of Babylon's other splendors, they serve a vital purpose. They capture the essence of how the world remembered Babylon, as a place of impossible scale and lavish beauty, a city that could conjure a mountain of flowers in the middle of a plain. The enduring mystery of the Hanging Gardens forces us to look closer at what we can actually touch, to the objects that were not lost to legend but were buried, waiting to tell a much more personal story. A city's true strength was measured by the walls that held its enemies at bay. Among the most legendary of these were the fortifications of Uruk, a metropolis so vast it was once the largest city on earth. The scale of these walls was the stuff of myth, literally attributed to the superhuman efforts of its most famous king, Gilgamesh. In the epic poem that bears his name, building the Great Wall of Uruk is his crowning achievement, a permanent mark of his reign and a defiant barrier separating the ordered world of the city from the untamed wilderness beyond. The text itself ends by inviting the reader to admire this very wall, its foundations of fired brick and its mighty ramparts. For the people of Mesopotamia, these walls were not just defensive structures, they were the ultimate symbol of civilization itself, a physical line drawn against chaos. The archaeological reality matches the legend in its ambition. Excavations at the site of Uruk in southern Iraq have revealed the staggering remains of these fortifications. They were not simple barriers but complex systems. The city was encircled by a massive wall of mud brick, traced by archaeologists to be over 9 kilometers in length, punctuated by hundreds of semicircular towers and several monumental gates. One of the most impressive finds is the so-called Stone Cone Temple, an earlier structure whose facade was decorated with thousands of colored stone cones pressed into clay, creating a shimmering geometric pattern, hinting at the artistic sophistication that existed within those protective walls. Walking the perimeter today, you see great, undulating mounds of earth, the melted remains of those once precise bricks after millennia of sun and wind. It is a landscape of softened angles and baked clay, but the sheer, sprawling footprint is unmistakable. You can stand where a gateway once funneled traders, soldiers, and farmers, and look out across the plain, understanding viscerally what that wall meant. It meant safety, community, and identity. Inside was law, commerce, and temple. Outside was the unknown. The walls of Uruk tell a story of collective endeavor on an unimaginable scale, a project that would have required the coordinated labor of thousands for years. They make the hero King Gilgamesh feel startlingly real because someone had to organize such a feat. But if walls define the city's physical boundary, what defined the thoughts and beliefs of the people living within them? What did they write upon, and what stories did they choose to preserve? But how did they picture that universe? The answer lies not on a grand wall, but in the palm of your hand. In the University of Pennsylvania Museum, there is a small, unassuming clay tablet, cracked and worn, known as the Nippur map. Created sometime between the 14th and 13th centuries before the Common Era, this is one of the oldest known world maps in existence. It is a window into the Mesopotamian mind, a schematic drawing of how they understood everything. The map is circular, a disk of land surrounded by a ring of water labeled the Bitter River, which is the ocean. At the very center of this disk sits a single, unmistakable dot representing the city of Nippur itself. Radiating out from this center are other circles marking key cities like Babylon and Susa, along with annotations for mountains, marshes, and distant mythical regions. This is not a map for navigation. You could not use it to travel from one city to another. It is a cosmic diagram, a blend of known geography and deep mythology. The places it names are a mixture of real locations and legendary ones mentioned in epic tales, like the land of Dilmun, a paradise often associated with the story of the Great Flood. The map tells us that for the ancient Mesopotamians, geography and cosmology were inseparable. Their world was an ordered, finite place, with their own sacred cities at the literal center of creation, protected by a circular moat from the chaotic waters of the unknown that encircled everything. The Nippur map is a profound statement of identity. It says, here we are, and this is our world, defined not by coastlines or distances, but by significance and story. It is a humble clay tablet that contains an entire universe, proving that sometimes the grandest ideas are inscribed on the smallest, most fragile surfaces. This conceptual map of the world makes you wonder, what other kinds of knowledge did they commit to clay, and for what urgent, practical purpose? The world of the Nippur map was conceptual, but another wonder recorded reality with the precision of a royal chronicle. Far to the north, guarding the entrance to the palace of the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III at Balawat, stood a set of immense wooden gates. The wood is long gone, rotted to dust, but what adorned them survives, and it is spectacular. These were the Balawat gates, sheathed in dozens of horizontal bronze bands, each one meticulously hammered using a technique called repoussé, where the scenes are raised from the back of the metal. These bands were not mere decoration, they were a sprawling, metallic history book. Walking along them in the British Museum today is like following a grand comic strip of imperial power. Each band, about a foot tall, unfolds a continuous narrative. You see the relentless machinery of the Assyrian army on the march, with soldiers in pointed helmets crossing mountains and rivers on inflatable skin rafts. There are detailed scenes of siege warfare, with battering rams attacking city walls and prisoners being led away. Other panels shift from conquest to administration, showing long processions of foreign delegations, from Syrians to Israelites, bringing tribute, leading exotic animals like monkeys and elephants, their submission captured for eternity in shimmering bronze. One remarkable sequence even documents the king's construction projects, including the very gates themselves, showing laborers felling cedar trees in Lebanon and transporting the massive logs back to Assyria. This was propaganda in its most durable form, a permanent record meant to awe any visitor who approached the palace. The sheer artistry is breathtaking, with tiny details like the patterns on clothing, the feathers on arrows, and the expressions on faces all rendered with astonishing clarity. The Balawat gates served a dual purpose. They protected the physical entrance to the king's domain while broadcasting the story of his invincibility. They tell us that for the Assyrians, history was not just something to be written on clay tablets in archives. It was something to be worn on the front door, a bold, metallic declaration that the king's reach was vast, his wealth immense, and his memory permanent. But if these gates celebrated the king's earthly triumphs, what did the people believe watched over their most personal hopes and fears? In a dimly lit gallery of the National Museum of Iraq rests a face from the very dawn of history. This is the Mask of Walker, also called the Lady of Uruk, a life-sized sculpture carved from pure white marble around 5,100 years ago. It is not a mask meant to be worn, but a sculpted face, perhaps once part of a larger composite statue. Its discovery in the sacred precinct of the great city of Uruk, near the temple of the goddess Inanna, immediately links it to the divine. When you look at her, you are struck by an eerie, timeless humanity. This is one of the earliest known attempts in Mesopotamia to capture a human face with naturalistic grace, not as a symbolic idol, but as a portrait of serene, individual beauty. The sculptor paid exquisite attention to the soft curves of the cheeks, the strong, arched brows, and the delicate ears pierced for precious ornaments. But it is the eyes that hold you, or rather, the absence within them. The sockets are empty, hollowed out, suggesting they were once inlaid with luminous materials like lapis lazuli or shell, perhaps with a bright stone pupil that would have made her gaze seem alive and piercing. This intentional void creates a profound duality. She is both present and distant, human and otherworldly. Scholars have debated for decades, who does this face belong to? Does it represent the goddess Inanna herself, the powerful deity of love, war, and fertility staring out from her temple? Or is it the likeness of a high priestess, a human woman who served as the goddess's living embodiment on earth, her features immortalized in sacred stone? The truth is lost to time, but the effect is undeniable. She is a bridge between our world and theirs, a singular artistic leap that sought to capture not just form but spirit. The mask's modern story is as dramatic as its ancient one. In the chaos following the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the National Museum in Baghdad was looted. The Mask of Walker, this priceless icon of human heritage, was stolen from its case. For weeks, its fate was unknown. A devastating loss that symbolized the fragility of cultural memory in times of conflict. Then, in a tense recovery operation, it was found buried in a farmer's orchard, wrapped in cloth, unharmed. Its rescue was a moment of hope, a testament to the enduring value we place on these connections to our deepest past. The Lady of Uruk now sits again in her museum, her empty eyes witnessing the passage of millennia. She is more than a beautiful artifact. She is a silent witness to both artistic genius and modern vulnerability, a reminder that every face from the past tells a story we are responsible for preserving. Her serene expression makes you wonder what other voices from this era were not carved in stone but sung into the air, and could their music ever be recovered? The serene gaze of the Lady of Yurok was meant for her temple, but another kind of guardian was built to stare down any threat with terrifying power. Towering over the gateways of Assyrian palaces, the Lamashu were the ultimate sentinels. These were not mere statues, but colossal hybrid deities carved from a single block of alabaster, standing up to 15 feet tall. Imagine a creature with the muscular body of a bull or a lion, the majestic wings of a great eagle, and the bearded, crowned head of a wise human king. This fusion was deliberate and symbolic, combining the raw strength of the beast, the swift sovereignty of the bird, and the intelligent authority of the ruler. Their function was explicitly apotropaic, a word meaning to ward off evil. They were placed at the most vulnerable points, the palace and city gates, to spiritually block any malevolent force, demon, or enemy from crossing the threshold. To pass between them was to be purified and deemed worthy to enter the king's divine space. But the true genius of the Lamashu is revealed when you walk around one. From the front, the creature stands imposingly still on two legs, a monument of solid, unmovable stone. Take a step to the side and the illusion unfolds. It appears to be walking forward. This clever effect was achieved through a fifth leg. The sculptor gave the Lamashu 4 legs visible from the side view, creating a natural striding motion, but from the front, an extra, stationary leg was added to complete the frontal composition and maintain that sense of eternal watchfulness. This 5-legged design was a masterstroke of ancient artistic engineering, ensuring the guardian presented perfect stability and imposing movement from every angle a visitor might approach. The most famous of these figures once guarded the palaces of kings like Ashurnasirpal II at Nimrud and Sargon II at Khorsabad. Their fate in the modern era tells its own story of discovery and dispersal. In the 19th century, European archaeologists uncovered these giants and, through immense effort, sawed them into transportable sections to ship to museums in London, Paris, and Chicago. Today, a Lamashu greets visitors in the British Museum's Great Gallery, while another stands in the Louvre, and a pair flank an entrance at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They have become global icons of Assyrian might, yet they are forever severed from their architectural context, from the gateways they were born to protect. To stand before one is to feel a shiver of awe, not just at their scale, but at the profound belief system they represent, a world where stone could be imbued with a divine spirit to watch over the realms of men. If these colossal hybrids guarded the gates, what sacred objects were deemed important enough to be protected inside, within the palace's most secure rooms? The Lamashu stood guard against earthly and supernatural threats, but the greatest danger in Mesopotamian myth was not an invading army, it was water. In the British Museum, a collection of broken clay tablets holds a story that would shatter Victorian England's understanding of its own past. This is the Flood Tablet, part of the great epic of Gilgamesh from the Library of Nineveh. The tablet itself is unassuming, a fragment of fired clay inscribed with dense, wedge-shaped cuneiform characters. Its text, however, is one of the most consequential literary discoveries ever made. It recounts the tale of Utnapishtim, a wise man warned by the god E of a coming deluge meant to wipe out all of humanity. The instructions are chillingly familiar. Tear down your house, E commands, and build a great boat, its length equal to its breadth. Bring the seed of all living creatures into it. Utnapishtim obeys, constructing a massive, cube-shaped vessel, loading it with his family, craftsmen, and animals. Then the storm comes, a tempest so violent even the gods cower in fear, regretting their decision. For 6 days and 7 nights the flood rages until all of humanity is turned to clay. The boat finally grounds on a mountain, and Utnapishtim releases a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven which does not return, signaling the waters have receded. The parallels to the later biblical story of Noah are unmistakable and profound. This tablet was written in the 7th century before the Common Era, but the story it records is far older, dating back to Sumerian traditions over 1,000 years earlier. The discovery's impact, however, belongs to a man named George Smith. In 1872, this self-taught Assyriologist was painstakingly sorting through thousands of clay fragments in the British Museum. When he pieced together this particular tablet and began to translate its lines, he reportedly became so excited he jumped up and began running around the room, and in his exhilaration started to remove his clothes. The news of his decipherment caused an international sensation. Here was a flood narrative, a cornerstone of biblical tradition, recorded on a tablet centuries older than the Book of Genesis. It forced a seismic shift in scholarly and public thought, proving that these foundational stories were part of a far older, shared cultural heritage of the ancient Near East. The flood tablet does more than predate a religious text. It speaks to a universal human anxiety. The idea of a cataclysmic flood wiping the slate clean appears in myths from the Greeks to the Maya. It represents a deep, primal memory, perhaps of real, devastating regional floods in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, transformed over generations into a cosmic moral lesson. The tablet is a humble piece of clay that carries the weight of a world-altering idea, that our oldest stories are conversations across millennia, echoing the same fears and hopes about survival, divine judgment, and second chances. It makes you wonder, what other timeless human experiences did they capture not in epic poetry, but in the mundane records of daily commerce? A chariot wheel lies half buried in dry earth, its metal rim still holding a ghostly shape. This is the royal cemetery of Kish, a sprawling necropolis north of Babylon that whispers of a time when kingship itself was being forged. While Ur's tombs capture the imagination with their gold and sacrifice, Kish offers a different, equally vital puzzle. Its graves, dating to the early dynastic period around 2,600 years before the Common Era, held warriors and elites buried with their vehicles of war and status, elaborate chariots with solid wheels, often accompanied by the teams of oxen or donkeys that pulled them. The metalwork found here, from copper helmets to intricate inlaid weapons, speaks of a society mastering materials and projecting power through martial display. Archaeologists even uncovered a massive, enigmatic pit dubbed the Y Trench, a deep, branching excavation whose purpose remains debated. Was it a defensive moat, a ceremonial boundary, or something else entirely? But the most tantalizing find from Kish is a small, unassuming piece of limestone known as the Kish tablet. This fragment bears a series of simple, geometric markings, scratches that some scholars have controversially identified as proto-cuneiform, a form of symbolic notation that could predate the fully developed writing system from Uruk by a century or more. If this interpretation is correct, it would mean the idea of recording language in symbols was being experimented with in multiple city-states, a flickering of intellectual revolution before it fully caught flame. The debate around the tablet is fierce, emblematic of how archaeology constantly rewrites its own stories. Kish itself was a legendary city in Sumerian king lists, often cited as the place where kingship descended from the heavens after the Great Flood. The cemetery's evidence of wealth, organized warfare, and possible early writing paints a picture of a fiercely competitive early dynastic world, where rival city-states like Kish, and Uruk were vying for supremacy, testing new technologies of control, both on the battlefield and in the administration of their growing domain. The graves at Kish don't just hold bodies, they hold the contested origins of political power. Who were these early rulers, and what gave them the right to be buried with such pomp? The answer may lie not in their tombs, but in the very symbols they used to command loyalty from the living. That humble Nippur map was a first attempt to sketch the cosmos, but centuries later, Babylonian scholars refined this vision into a masterpiece of symbolic geography. Known as the Imago Mundi or Babylonian world map, this clay tablet from the 6th century before the Common Era is a breathtaking fusion of observation, mythology, and imperial pride. You can find it today in the British Museum, a single circular diagram that captures the entire known universe as Babylon understood it. At its heart, literally and symbolically, is a bold rectangle labeled Babylon, the undeniable center of creation. A vertical bar representing the Euphrates River flows through it, connecting to a ring of water encircling the entire landmass, labeled Maratu, the bitter river or ocean. This much echoes the older Nippur map, but here the details multiply. Around Babylon, small circles mark real neighboring regions like Assyria and Urartu, and a curving shape denotes the marshy southern land. But then, the map ventures into the truly extraordinary. Beyond the circular ocean, on the outer edge of the disk, the artist drew 8 triangular regions like mountain peaks or distant islands, each one labeled with mysterious, evocative names. One reads, a region where the sun is not seen, a land of perpetual darkness. Another is labeled beyond the flight of birds. These are not places any merchant or soldier had visited. They are the realms of legend and myth, the conceptual edges of the world where knowledge faded into story. This tablet is not a failure of geography, it is a triumph of cosmological thinking. It honestly depicts the limits of empirical knowledge while boldly asserting the structure of reality as they believed it to be. It shows us that for the Babylonians, the world was a coherent, organized system, with their magnificent city as its axis. The map blends the tangible, like the Euphrates and the cities of their empire, with the intangible, the mythical lands from their epic literature. This evolution from the simpler Nippur map reveals a civilization deepening its intellectual curiosity, trying to fit everything from trade routes to ancient tales into a single, elegant diagram. It is a humble clay tablet that contains a profound philosophical statement that the world is knowable, orderly, and centered on us. Yet this confident map of the universe makes you wonder, how did such a sophisticated civilization manage the far more chaotic and mundane details of daily life, of taxes, harvests, and rations? While kings carved their conquests into palace walls, a ruler in the city of Lagash chose a different path to immortality. In the quiet galleries of the Louvre, a row of dark, polished statues stands with an aura of profound calm. These are the statues of Gudea, ruler of the city-state of Lagash around 4,100 years ago. Carved from incredibly hard diorite stone, a material imported from distant lands, each figure depicts the same man in a state of serene devotion. Gudea is always shown with a shaved head, a sign of ritual purity, dressed in a simple, draped robe that falls in elegant, heavy folds. His most distinctive feature is his posture, his hands clasped gently in front of his chest in a timeless gesture of prayer and reverence. Unlike the striding, muscular Assyrian kings, Gudea is seated or standing in perfect stillness, his face composed into a gentle, introspective smile, his wide eyes gazing intently at something beyond this world. These are not monuments to military might, they are monuments to piety and duty. The magic of these statues is not just in their form, but in their words. Each one is covered in meticulously carved cuneiform inscriptions, a kind of permanent resume in stone. The texts detail Gudea's greatest achievements, not battles won, but temples built. They list the elaborate rituals he performed, the precious materials like cedar wood and gold he imported for construction, and his constant, careful service to the gods, particularly Ningersu, the patron deity of Lagash. One famous inscription describes a dream where the god himself commanded Gudea to rebuild his temple, providing specific architectural instructions. Gudea's statues were his eternal proxies. They were placed within the temples he built, acting as permanent stand-ins for the ruler himself. The idea was that even when Gudea was asleep or tending to affairs of state or long after his death, this stone version of him would remain in the god's presence, his clasped hands forever offering prayer, his attentive gaze forever demonstrating loyalty. This ensured a continuous stream of divine favor, protection, and blessing for the entire city of Lagash. In a world of shifting alliances and sudden floods, Gudea invested in spiritual infrastructure. His calm diorite figures tell us that one path to lasting legacy was not through fear, but through faithful stewardship, a belief that a city's true strength flowed from the favor of the gods, diligently maintained by a righteous ruler. This intimate, spiritual contract between king and deity makes you wonder, how did ordinary people, without statues carved in their honor, seek to communicate with the divine in their own daily lives? Gudea's statues offered a silent, eternal prayer, but a far older artifact shows us that prayer in vibrant, communal motion. Deep within the National Museum of Iraq, a vessel of pure white alabaster stands about 3 feet tall, its surface carved with one of the most eloquent stories ever told in stone. This is the Yoruk vase, created around 5,000 years ago, and it is not just a container, it is a sacred diagram of the entire Sumerian cosmos. The story unfolds in 3 precise horizontal bands, like a comic strip from the dawn of civilization. At the very bottom, the foundation of everything, we see the waters of life. Wavy lines represent the rivers, and from them sprout rows of alternating barley and date palms, the twin staples of Mesopotamian agriculture. This is the fertile earth itself, the source of all sustenance. Above this bounty, the middle register comes alive with human activity. A procession of naked priests moves in a steady line, each figure nearly identical, emphasizing their role as anonymous servants of a greater purpose. They carry baskets and vessels overflowing with the land's produce, the very fruits and grains shown growing below. Their nudity is not a sign of poverty, but of ritual purity, a shedding of worldly status as they prepare to approach the divine. Their procession is the engine that connects the earthly realm to the heavenly one, and at the very top, in the place of highest honor, we witness the culmination. The offerings are presented to a majestic figure standing before 2 temple poles topped with ring symbols, the unmistakable emblem of the goddess Inanna. She is larger than the other figures, a visual cue to her importance, and she accepts the gifts that sustain her and, by extension, the entire world. Behind her, the treasures are piled high within the temple storehouse. The vase itself was likely used in the very ceremonies it depicts, perhaps to hold ritual offerings of grain or sacred water. But its true function was far grander. It visually articulated a core belief that held society together, that human labor, directed through proper ritual, transformed the raw fertility of the earth into gifts worthy of the gods, who would then ensure the cycle continued. It is a contract carved in alabaster, a promise that order would prevail over chaos. To look at the Yoruk vase is to see the Sumerian worldview in perfect, elegant harmony, a reminder that their greatest art was often an act of sacred explanation. If this vase illustrates a perfect ritual order, what happened when that order was shattered by forces beyond any priest's control? The serene order of the Yoruk vase shows a world in perfect balance, but the Assyrian Empire maintained its order through a very different kind of ritual, one of calculated terror. In the British Museum, an entire room is dominated by a sprawling, visceral narrative carved into stone panels that once lined the palace of King Sennacherib at Nineveh. These are the Lachish reliefs, and they document not a myth or a ceremony, but a raw historical event, the brutal Assyrian siege of the fortified Judean city of Lachish in 701 years before the Common Era. Walking alongside these gypsum panels is like watching a newsreel from the ancient world, one with a very clear and chilling editorial slant. The story unfolds with relentless graphic detail. At the bottom, you see the Assyrian war machine in flawless operation. soldiers in disciplined ranks advancing up a specially built ramp under a hail of arrows from the city walls above. Then the centerpiece of the assault, the massive, wheeled battering rams, each one housed in a protective wooden shed covered in wet hides to deflect fire arrows, their iron-tipped heads relentlessly pounding the city's gates and walls. The defenders of Lachish fight back desperately, throwing torches and stones, but the Assyrian narrative leaves no doubt about the outcome. The upper registers show the grim aftermath. Judean prisoners are led down the ramp, their families and belongings in tow, beginning the long, tragic march into exile. Other scenes show captives being executed, while Assyrian scribes calmly record the plunder. One particularly harrowing depiction shows 3 prisoners impaled on stakes outside the city, a grisly warning to any who would consider defiance. This was not art for art's sake, it was psychological warfare carved in stone. Sennacherib had these panels installed in the most public room of his palace, where foreign ambassadors and subject rulers would have to view them. The message was unambiguous: this is the fate of any city that rebels against Assyria. Look upon the precision of our engineering, the discipline of our soldiers, and the utter totality of your defeat. Resistance is not just futile, it is catastrophic. Yet for all its brutal propaganda, the reliefs are also an invaluable historical document. They provide an astonishingly detailed record of 7th century warfare, from the design of siege engines and armor to the tactics used by both attacker and defender. They even show the specific clothing and hairstyles of the Judeans, offering a rare visual portrait of a people known mainly from texts. The Lachish reliefs force us to confront a duality. They are both a masterpiece of ancient narrative art and a stark monument to imperial violence, a permanent record of a city's destruction designed to ensure no other would dare follow its path. This graphic display of power aimed to crush the spirit, but it raises a quieter question. What forms of expression persisted in the shadow of such empires? What gentle arts were cultivated not in palaces but in private homes? That brutal siege carved in stone tells a story of conquest, but a far older tablet holds the story of creation itself. Known as the Eridu Genesis, this fragmented Sumerian text is one of humanity's oldest surviving origin myths, written on clay over 4,000 years ago. It begins not with a single god speaking light into being, but with a committee of deities. In the beginning, the text says, the gods themselves had to labor, tilling the land and digging canals. They grew tired of this toil and rebelled. To solve this divine labor crisis, the mother goddess Nintu, with the help of the wise god Enki, mixed clay with the flesh and blood of a slain god who had instigated the rebellion. From this primal substance, she fashioned the first humans. Our purpose, according to this ancient text, was explicitly stated: to take over the burdensome work of the gods, to maintain the canals and feed the deities with our sacrifices. Humanity was created as a servant class to maintain cosmic order, a profound and humble beginning. The myth then traces the founding of the first cities, beginning with Eridu, which it names as the very first city given to humanity by the gods. It lists a succession of antediluvian kings who ruled for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years, establishing kingship as another divine gift. Finally, the text warns of a great flood sent by the gods to destroy noisy, overpopulous humanity, a decision regretted by the god Enki, who instructs a pious king, Ziusudra, to build a giant boat and preserve life. The parallels to later flood stories are unmistakable, but the Eridu Genesis is the foundational layer. It is the Sumerian prototype that later Akkadian civilizations would adapt and expand. In the Akkadian epic Atrahasis, the reason for the flood is more specific. The gods are disturbed by the incessant noise of humanity, a beautifully relatable complaint about overcrowding. That story was then incorporated into the epic of Gilgamesh, where the flood survivor is named Utnapishtim. This evolution shows a living literary tradition where core myths were retold, refined, and passed down for over a millennium. What makes the Eridu Genesis so haunting, however, is its direct link to physical reality. The city of Eridu, whose ruins lie in southern Iraq, is considered by archaeologists to be the earliest settlement in Sumer, dating back to around 5,400 years before the Common Era. It began as a simple shrine built on a reed platform in the marshes, dedicated to Enki, the god of fresh water and wisdom, the very deity who helps create humans in the myth. Over centuries, that shrine was rebuilt and enlarged layer upon layer, eventually becoming a substantial ziggurat. The myth and the archaeology are in a silent conversation. The story says the gods founded Eridu first, and the digging shows it was indeed one of the very first places where people gathered in large numbers, built a temple, and created what we call a city. This tablet is more than a story. It is a civilization explaining its own birth, weaving its deepest spiritual beliefs into the very soil of its oldest settlement. It suggests that for the Sumerians, the rise of cities was not just a practical development, but a divine plan set in motion at the dawn of time. If this tablet explains why humans were placed in cities, what can we learn from the objects they left behind in their simplest, most personal spaces? The haunting origin myths of Eridu spoke of humanity's divine purpose, but in the palaces of later empires, that purpose was often to produce objects of breathtaking beauty for the elite. Among the ashes of the Assyrian capital of Nimrud, archaeologists uncovered a treasure that whispers not of raw power, but of delicate artistry and far-reaching connections. These are the Nimrud ivories, a stunning collection of thousands of carved panels, figurines, and furniture ornaments, many of them discovered charred and fragmented in the ruins of the royal palaces after the city's violent fall in 612 years before the Common Era. Their survival is a small miracle, for ivory is a fragile medium, and fire should have consumed them completely. Instead, the very conflagration that destroyed Nimrud carbonized and preserved them, leaving these delicate works etched in blackened relief. The first thing that strikes you about these ivories is their style. It is distinctly not Assyrian. The intricate carvings show the clear influence of Phoenician and Syrian workshops from the coastal cities of the Mediterranean. They were luxury imports, either acquired through vast trade networks or brought as lavish tribute from subject kingdoms, then used by Assyrian royalty to adorn their most opulent furniture, chariots, and beds. The scenes depicted are a window into a cosmopolitan aesthetic. You see mythical creatures like sphinxes and griffins, elegant processions of animals, and detailed depictions of Egyptian-inspired deities like the goddess Hathor. There are vivid panels showing lion hunts and scenes of feasting, all rendered with a fluid, naturalistic grace that contrasts with the more rigid, formal style of native Assyrian stone reliefs. But perhaps the most famous single piece is a small, haunting fragment known as the Mona Lisa of Nimrud. It is just a woman's face carved in the Phoenician style, with large, inlaid eyes that would have once held precious stones. She wears an enigmatic, subtle smile, a look of serene knowledge that seems to transcend the violence that ultimately surrounded her. Her expression is neither wholly joyful nor sad, but profoundly contemplative, a silent human presence amidst the grandeur of empire. These ivories tell a story that the stone lamassu and siege reliefs do not. They reveal the soft power behind the hard power. They show that the Assyrian elite, for all their martial prowess, had a taste for imported luxury and foreign art. The presence of these objects in the heart of the Assyrian Empire speaks of a complex web of international exchange, where artisans in Tyre or Damascus carved these masterpieces, likely inspired by Egyptian and Aegean motifs, which then traveled east to decorate the bedrooms and throne rooms of Nineveh and Nimrud. They are physical evidence of a connected ancient world, where artistic ideas flowed along the same routes as soldiers and taxes. To hold one, even in imagination, is to touch the personal luxury of a long-dead king, and to glimpse the delicate networks of trade that thrived even under the shadow of the most formidable army on earth. Their charred state adds a layer of poignant tragedy. They were beautiful things caught in a cataclysmic end, a reminder that even the most refined art is fragile before the fires of history. This silent exchange of beauty between empires makes you wonder what other forms of knowledge and innovation were passing between cultures, not in carved ivory, but in the precise movements of the stars. The delicate artistry of the Nimrod ivories speaks of a world connected by trade, but another wonder reveals a civilization connected by ideas, systematically preserved against the ravages of time. In the ruins of the temple of the sun god Shamash at Sippar, archaeologists uncovered a treasure not of gold but of clay, a library of staggering scope and order. This was the Sippar Library, a collection of thousands upon thousands of cuneiform tablets, meticulously organized and stored, representing one of the most sophisticated knowledge repositories of the ancient world. Unlike a haphazard archive, this was a true library with tablets systematically arranged by subject, many of them bearing colophons, which are notes at the end that identified the scribe, the date, and sometimes even the source from which the text was copied. Imagine walking into a room lined with shelves, each holding hundreds of these clay books covering every facet of Babylonian thought. There were literary masterpieces, including multiple copies of the Epic of Gilgamesh, ensuring this great story would not be lost. There were exhaustive religious texts, hymns, prayers, and detailed rituals for appeasing the gods. Legal codes and precedent cases sat alongside vast scientific and scholarly works, from mathematical tables and astronomical observations to medical prescriptions and elaborate omen texts that interpreted the will of the gods through events like eclipses or the flight patterns of birds. The library's existence was no accident. It was the product of a powerful, centuries-old institution, the Scribble School. In cities like Sippar, which was a major cult center for Shamash, the god of justice and truth, these schools were the engines of cultural continuity. Young scribes, often from elite families, underwent years of rigorous training. They began by mastering hundreds of complex cuneiform signs on practice tablets, then progressed to copying standard texts from a curriculum. The library's holdings were both the textbooks for this education and the master copies from which new generations of scribes would work. When a scribe finished a copy, his colophon was a mark of pride and responsibility, a chain of custody linking him back through generations of scholars. This system created an unbroken lineage of knowledge. A medical text from Sippar might be a copy of a much older Sumerian original, faithfully transmitted over 500 years. The library was a fortress against forgetting, a deliberate, collective project to hold onto the wisdom of the past. It tells us that the Babylonians understood something profound, that a civilization's true strength lies not just in its armies or its wealth, but in its memory, carefully inscribed, catalogued, and passed from one careful hand to the next. In these quiet, dusty tablets, we see the birth of the academic tradition itself, a commitment to preserving light in a world of constant change. Those scribes copying texts in Sippar were preserving a cultural inheritance, but in another corner of Babylon, a different kind of scribe was at work, recording not myths or omens, but the raw, unfolding events of the empire itself. These are the Babylonian Chronicles, a remarkable series of clay tablets that offer a year-by-year, almost clinical account of history as it happened. Unlike the grand, boastful inscriptions carved on palace walls by kings to glorify their reigns, these chronicles were administrative documents, likely kept by temple scribes for their own records. Their tone is strikingly matter-of-fact. A typical entry might read, "In the 3rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Akkad mustered his army and marched to the land of Hatti. He laid siege to the city of Jerusalem and captured it on the 2nd day of the month of Adaru. He appointed a king of his own choice there, took its heavy tribute and brought it to Babylon." That dry, unemotional note is a direct reference to the capture of Jerusalem by King Nebuchadnezzar II in 597 years before the Common Era, an event of monumental importance in the Hebrew Bible. The Chronicles provide the same dispassionate service for other pivotal moments, like the catastrophic fall of the Assyrian capital, Nineveh, to a combined Babylonian and Median army in 612 years before the Common Era. The tablet simply records the alliance, the siege, the conquest, and the vast plunder taken, without any dramatic flair about divine vengeance or royal heroism. This analytic style is what makes them so invaluable to modern historians. They act as an anchor, a fixed point in time against which other, more partisan accounts can be measured. When the Bible describes the same siege of Jerusalem, its perspective is one of tragedy and theological reflection. The Babylonian Chronicle offers the stark official version, the date, the outcome, the geopolitical result. By cross-referencing these sources, we can triangulate the truth of history with far greater confidence. These tablets remind us that history is not just one story, but a collection of viewpoints, and the most reliable narrator is sometimes the bored bureaucrat in the temple, diligently noting down who did what and when, for the simple reason that it needed to be remembered. In their quiet, unadorned prose, they grant us the rare gift of a shared timeline with the ancient world, a calendar where their years and our understanding finally meet. Those chronicles recorded events with bureaucratic precision, but long before empires kept such ledgers, people expressed their deepest hopes and fears through objects of startling simplicity. In the dusty plains of northeastern Syria, at a site called Tel Brak, archaeologists uncovered a collection so strange and haunting it seems to whisper from the very dawn of civilization. Scattered across what was once an ancient temple of the 4th millennium before the Common Era were not treasures of gold, but thousands of small, crudely carved figurines made of white alabaster and stone. They are known as the eye idols of Tel Brak, and their design is mesmerizing in its minimalist power. Each one is abstract, little more than a slender, rectangular body with a pair of enormous, drilled circles representing eyes. Some have a smaller, third dot between them, perhaps a nose, and a few feature a simple groove to suggest a neck. That is all. There are no mouths, no detailed limbs, no inscriptions. They are blank slates dominated by that single, overwhelming feature, the gaze. To hold one is to feel the weight of that stare, an intense, silent attention fixed across 5,500 years. Their discovery context provides the first clue to their purpose. They were found in the ruins of a temple complex in the ancient city of Naga, a major northern outpost of Mesopotamian culture. They were not hidden in a tomb or a treasury, but seemingly deposited as offerings, left in groups, sometimes piled together. This suggests they were not personal amulets, but part of a communal ritual, perhaps brought by hundreds or thousands of individuals over generations. But who or what do these staring figures represent? Scholars have wrestled with this for decades. One compelling theory is that they are votive offerings, gifts to the gods. In this interpretation, a person would bring a small idol to the temple as a physical stand-in for themselves, its oversized eyes symbolizing the donor's constant, attentive worship, a plea for the deity to see them and acknowledge their devotion. The idol would remain in the temple long after the person left, a permanent witness to their faith. Another idea is that the idols are not representations of worshippers but of the gods themselves. They could be minimalist depictions of a specific, all-seeing deity. Their abstract form a deliberate choice to convey an essence rather than a likeness, a being defined solely by its limitless perception. This connects to a broader theme in Mesopotamian art, where enlarged eyes often signify supernatural awareness and vigilance. Their eerie, collective presence is what makes them so unforgettable. Imagine the temple precinct with niches and altars holding not a few statues but hundreds, then thousands of these silent, staring figures. The effect would have been overwhelming, a crowd of stone witnesses creating an atmosphere of palpable, watchful presence. It speaks to a religious experience that was deeply personal yet massively shared, where the individual act of offering merged into a powerful communal statement. The eye idols of Tel Brak challenge our modern need for clear answers. They are artifacts of pure emotion and belief, stripped of all narrative, reducing spiritual longing to its most basic visual form, the desire to be seen and to feel that something greater is watching in return. They remind us that at the frontiers of early civilization, faith could be as simple and as profound as two circles carved in a piece of stone. While the eye idols offered silent, collective prayers, a king in another city kept a meticulous record of every word spoken in his name. The forgotten palace of Mari, a once powerful city-state on the Middle Euphrates, was a marvel of its age, a sprawling complex of over 260 rooms, courtyards, and towering walls. But its true wonder was not in its architecture, but in its paperwork. In a series of small, administrative rooms, archaeologists found a treasure trove that had survived fire, collapse, and millennia, the Mari Palace Archives. This was not a single library, but a functioning bureaucracy frozen in time, a collection of over 20,000 clay tablets that were the beating heart of a Bronze Age kingdom. These were not copies of ancient epics, but the original files, the day-to-day correspondence that kept a state alive. To read them is to open a direct line to the 18th century before the Common Era, to hear the voices of kings, diplomats, merchants, and spies. The letters are breathtakingly immediate. One tablet might be a frantic message from a border governor warning of nomadic tribes on the move. Another is a detailed report from an ambassador describing the lavish gifts he presented at a rival king's court and the even more lavish promises he received in return. We read the personal correspondence of King Zimri Lim himself, strategizing with allies, chiding underperforming officials, and negotiating delicate marriages for his daughters to secure political alliances. The economic records are just as vivid, listing everything from the distribution of wool and grain to workers, to the meticulous inventory of precious oils and textiles in the palace storerooms, giving us a precise ledger of royal wealth. But perhaps most striking are the prophetic texts. At Mari, prophecy was not a distant mystical art, but a formal branch of intelligence gathering. The archives contain reports from temple officials and even ordinary citizens, often women, who would deliver messages they claimed came directly from the gods, advising the king on matters of war, treaty, and public morality. The king took these divine warnings seriously, filing them alongside military dispatches and diplomatic cables. Together, these thousands of tablets paint a portrait of a world both familiar and foreign, a complex web of diplomacy, trade, and intrigue stretching from the Mediterranean coast to the Persian Gulf. The palace is gone, but its archives resurrect the daily pulse of a lost civilization, proving that the most enduring wonders are sometimes simply the records of how people talk to each other. Her archives held the whispers of statecraft, but another room in Nineveh held a scream carved in stone. In the North Palace of Ashurbanipal, among the many panels celebrating the royal lion hunt, there is one relief that stops every viewer in their tracks. It is the image of a dying lioness. She has been pierced by 3 arrows, one in her spine. Her back legs are completely paralyzed, rendered useless, dragging behind her like dead weight through the dust. Yet her front legs remain strong, muscles taut as she pulls her body forward in a final, desperate act of defiance. Her head is thrown back, her mouth wide open in a roar that you can almost hear, a sound mixing rage, agony, and a profound, unyielding will. This is not a generic symbol of the king's power. It is a portrait of a specific, suffering creature in her last moments. The Assyrian artist observed this agony with a heartbreaking precision that transcends mere propaganda. You can see the individual ribs straining beneath her skin, the detailed texture of her mane, the tension in every tendon of her forelegs. The pathos is overwhelming, and it creates a stunning contradiction. This scene exists to glorify the king's ability to subdue the most ferocious beasts, to showcase his role as the protector of order against chaos. Yet the artist, in fulfilling that duty, could not help but also honor the lioness's courage. He granted her a tragic dignity, making her the emotional center of the narrative. Her suffering is not hidden, it is displayed in excruciating, beautiful detail. This single panel reveals a depth of empathy within Assyrian culture that their own official ideology might deny. It proves that the artisans in Nineveh were not just skilled technicians, but profound observers of life and death, capable of finding nobility even in a conquered enemy. For modern audiences, this lioness has become an icon, a timeless masterpiece of animal sculpture precisely because it bypasses politics and speaks directly to universal experience. She is a symbol of raw vitality meeting its end, of pain endured with a roar instead of a whimper. In her paralyzed drag and lifted head, we see the essence of struggle itself, a moment of pure, unadorned truth preserved in gypsum for 2,700 years. It forces a difficult question: can true artistic greatness exist even when it serves a brutal purpose? The answer, etched in this dying lioness's final breath, seems to be a heartbreaking yes. That lioness's final roar echoes a world of raw, physical struggle, but the people of Mesopotamia also fought a quieter, eternal battle against decay and divine displeasure. Their ultimate defense was not carved in palace walls but buried beneath them. In the sacred soil of the city of Lagash, archaeologists uncovered one of the most intimate and revealing rituals of all, the foundation figurines. These were not grand statues for public display, but small, simple objects of copper or stone, often just a few inches tall, shaped like gods, kings, or even animals. Their purpose was singular and profound. They were interred alive, in a sense, within the very foundations of a new temple or palace, sealed under floors or within cornerstone boxes at the moment of construction. Imagine a priest during the elaborate ceremony for a new temple to Ningersu, carefully placing a dozen of these tiny copper figures into a specially dug pit beneath the future altar. Each one might represent the ruler, Gudea, in a posture of perpetual prayer, or a minor deity like a protective genie. Once placed, the pit was sealed with a layer of clean sand or a dedicatory tablet, and the massive building was raised above them, literally resting on their sacred presence. This was a spiritual insurance policy. The belief was that these figurines would act as eternal servants, their metaphysical essence forever awake and vigilant. From their dark prison beneath the tons of brick and stone, they would continuously pray to the great gods above, whispering invocations for the building's endurance, for its protection against evil spirits, structural collapse, and the slow erosion of divine favor. They were the building's immortal guardians, its dedicated staff of supernatural maintenance workers, ensuring its spiritual integrity for as long as the foundations held. This practice reveals a mindset where architecture was never merely engineering. It was a living covenant with the divine. To lay a brick was a holy act, and to complete a structure required anchoring it not just in the earth but in the unseen world. The foundation figurines transformed a physical space into a consecrated one, populating it with permanent, pious tenants whose sole job was to uphold the contract between the king who built it and the god who sanctioned it. In these humble, hidden objects, we see the culmination of the Mesopotamian worldview, where every human achievement, from a city wall to a ziggurat, demanded a sacred counterpart, a silent prayer in copper or stone, buried deep to hold everything up forever. These 25 forgotten wonders form a mosaic of the human spirit in its earliest, most ambitious chapters. From the man-made mountain of Ur's ziggurat to the silent, staring eyes of the Tel Brak idols, they speak in a chorus of scale, artistry, faith, and power. They show us a world obsessed with reaching the heavens while meticulously recording the harvest, a civilization that could envision a map of the cosmos on a clay tablet and the brutal mechanics of a siege on a palace wall. The common thread woven through each marvel is a profound desire to make a mark, to build something that would outlast a single lifetime, whether it was a law code sanctioned by the gods, a library to hold all knowledge, or a tiny copper figurine buried to pray for eternity. These are not just artifacts in glass cases. They are the tangible, sometimes startlingly intimate, fingerprints of the people who first imagined cities, writing, law, and organized religion. They are our shared prologue, so the next time you walk through the halls of a museum, from the British Museum to the National Museum of Iraq, look for these connections. Seek out the serene face of the Lady of Uruk, trace the cuneiform on Hammurabi's stele, or stand in the shadow of a lamassu. Support the ongoing, vital work of archaeologists and preservationists who protect these fragile links to our collective past. And tell us which of these 25 forgotten wonders reached across the millennia to speak to you. Was it the haunting sacrifice in the Great Death Pit, the ingenious five-legged guardian, or the humble tablet that carried a flood story older than time? Share your thoughts below and keep the conversation with history alive.